were discovered by a record label in '93 by sending them demos wrapped in your own used underwear. And this led to that you were asked to sing lead vocals on a Steve Vai album.
That's exactly how it happened. I mean, I think the easiest way to kind of describe why that happened would be when I was very young. I came from a musical family. My family is, we're kind of a funny family, a very sarcastic family, and I was raised with many different styles of music, from classical or heavy rock like Jimi Hendrix or whatever was the mode of the day. ABBA, dance music, bluegrass. There was just so many different styles of music that when I finally had the opportunity to present what I do to the musical world, there was just so many different styles, right? And at first people were just like, well, this doesn't work. It's schizophrenic is the word they chose. And I started thinking about it specifically over the past couple of years. I'm like, if you really like these different types of music, there's no reason why you shouldn't do it. And when I was with Steve Vai in the beginning, I think that kind of multi-faceted musical angle that I had kind of, been taught from a very young age is what, allowed me to not only be with him, but also do all those things that you first mentioned. So.
Yeah, because you grew tired of working with Steve Vai and such, because you wanted to artistically express yourself. So... but the record companies didn't quite like what you yourself made. Can you tell us how you got out of this and started your solo projects and Strapping Lad?
Sure. To be clear, I didn't quit Steve Vai's band. It was only for that one project. So when it ended, it just ended. And it kind of left me to do, other music. I ended up joining a band in England called the Wild Hearts and just doing a bunch of things throughout my career that, were all over the place, musically, trying to find my footing. In terms of the music that I gave the first record company, I think the reason why they were unable to carry it through and put it out was because it did present so many different styles. And at that point I hadn't become adept enough at fusing them into something that made sense, and so it just sounded literally like I was toying with a bunch of styles without committing to one, right? So, I mean, the fact that they dropped me at the time, actually in hindsight, makes perfect sense, because it wasn't that good.
As in being dropped by the label. So is that what led to, basically, because your first, if you want to look at it that way, release under the Devin Townsend name would be Ocean Machine.
That's right.
Yeah. And is that why Heavy Debut, was that something that you would have started anyway?
Well, the Steve Vai record had done really well in Japan, and we had toured fairly extensively in Japan for that. And Sony was the label at the time, and I had a real hard time finding a label to do anything, right? Like Strapping Lad, any of that stuff. It's just, I was, Roadrunner had kind of brought me in, but then didn't follow through, and Relativity had brought me in and didn't follow through. So it was just a bit of a challenge for me at that point, trying to find a home.
Yeah.
And then Sony was the one that actually took the initiative, and they said, well, why don't you just create your own label, which is basically just setting up a fictional company that has an address. Producing it yourself with, money that you've made, and then we'll distribute it, and as a result of that you can keep the rights to it, and that's ended up what happened, right? Well, with the Strapping stuff we signed directly, but I actually was able to keep that non-exclusive, it's called, so I was able to do other things as well.
Okay, which normally would have been a problem.
Yeah, it's like my relationship with Century Media was, very interesting, right? Because I was with them at a point when they were very young, and I think that non-exclusive clause, which I managed to have the foresight, I'm proud to say, to include into that. I don't think they ever considered that I'd do 40 other things.
No, really, because at that time, I suppose around, well, the first Strapping album came out in 95?
Yep.
That's right. Okay, so that was before Century Media really had a big presence in the States, which is kind of what led them becoming so big. And another interesting thing I came across regarding the Ocean Machine album was it sold, was it 12,000 or so in Japan? Like in its first week or month?
I think it was Infinity, actually. The
was
next
Infinity,
one,
was it? Okay, right.
It was actually even more than that. I think it might have been like double than that, right? So,
really?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, my career path has definitely been, up and down. And I mean, if I had any inclination to actually make $1 million and follow through with it, I think there was a number of avenues I could have taken along this line that could have been more lucrative, right? But I think that, the way that I've kind of typically written music is it just seems to be a reaction to certain points in my life. So in a lot of ways, I don't really feel like I'm in control of the direction. I guess the way that I've discovered that I am in control of the direction now is, you know, controlling myself. So what I find myself engaged in terms of my life is choices that I make along the way, right? So, you know, like no drugs, no drink anymore will definitely like influence, you know, the path that my life takes, and will probably influence the music as a result. So,
which is why the new album does sound quite a bit different than I mean, you've always been kind of diverse, but this is something that's a big step. Do you think that's a direct result of the lifestyle change?
Oh, I would say so. But I would also say that this record is one of 4 that was written at one time, right? So each 3 to 4 months after the release of this, there's going to be another record. And those other records are a lot more congruent with what I had done in the past. I think, however, for the first record to release after this kind of period of silence, I really had to give some thought to what it is I wanted to represent. And I think in the past I've been maybe desperate on a certain level for acceptance, and therefore presenting things musically that, although honest at the time, where maybe my motivation for doing that was based in something like needing self-acceptance.
Do you think Strapping Lad was more, that would be a better description of the Strapping Lad stuff, or...?
I think that Strapping a Lad, one more record, would have become a total parody, because what made my favorite Strapping a Lad record for what it represents is the record City, right? And when I did City, I was 24 years old, and that's exactly what I wanted to do. It was effortless. That came out effortless. But then all of a sudden, you know, I've never really been invited into the cool guys club, you know, ever in my life, right? And so all of a sudden,
you formed it.
Well, I'm hoping that. Well, that's nice. Wow. But it's like, yeah, it'd get you everywhere. But with Strapping, it was like, because in the beginning there, all of a sudden people were taking notice of what I'd done. Where in the beginning I was like that, you know, nerdy kid from a Steve Vai's band, right? And so I think with Strapping a Lad, what I ended up trying to do was I tried to keep participating in an energy that at first was effortless, and by the end ended up being like me doing lots of things to myself, you know, physically or emotionally or spiritually, to try and reconnect with something that in a lot of ways I feel I'd already resolved. So the intention of doing those records was coming from an honest place, but why I did them, I think in hindsight might have been a little diluted, right? So this new record, Key, this first one, after that I thought, okay, well, if this is the first thing that people are going to hear from me, I'd like to present them with something that doesn't necessarily beg them to pay attention.
Okay, so this is the point where you'll basically come back on your own terms and
and I mean, you know, again, it's like what I've done with this Key record is I think, you know, subtle at first, but I think the more you listen to it, it gets heavier. And you know, the next 2 records are going to be progressively heavier. And with Key, the whole idea is just like, you know, I'm confident with who I am, and I'm confident with who I've become. And yes, there is heavy music, and yes, I've always going to have that anger in me, but what I choose to represent from here on out will be what I'm doing with the same intention that I did City with. You know, it's just the difference is what that intention was when I was 24 is much different than what I'm doing when I'm 37, right? So
that's good. You got a question here?